Today on the podcast, we are talking about one of the most viral stories of the week, which is the fact that Anthropic is embroiled in this massive lawsuit, and they have brought out the big guns. The federal judge is actually siding with Anthropic right now in a law that essentially Anthropic used AI or to generate their AI. They scanned millions of books, and the crazy thing is they physically purchase the actual physical books to scan, and they use that to train for AI. And because of this, they're actually looks like they're going to be winning this lawsuit. So there is a lot of crazy drama going on with this. Connor's been posting about it on LinkedIn and going absolutely viral as per usual. So I'm going to kick this over to you, Connor, and say, yeah, I guess what's the craziest piece of the story to you?
This is a story that we've been following for a long time. And, obviously I didn't want to say it started with OpenAI and New York Times and other people suing OpenAI, but this is the big story, right? Is this fair use or not? And by that, they just mean, are you allowed to train on copyrighted books to essentially learn, right? So by the way, Jaden, as I'm about to get into this, we have to say that Jaden has now switched physical locations. So we're super happy for him. And so to celebrate that, I got to shout out his AI box, because what is this new tool that Jaden has built over the last, it's probably 2 years now, guys. For $20 a month, you can get access to all the tools, to the Claudes and to the Groks and to the OpenAIs and Gemini's, everything, and you can just use it. I've been using it like crazy because you can compare models. And so this is just, I have to shout that out because Anthropic is one of the tools that Jaden also has integrated in there, and we've watched Anthropic get better and better. So first of all, go visit aibox.ai. It's phenomenal. It's already blowing up. We're super happy about that. But one of the reasons that these tools are so good, Jaden, is because of exactly what we're talking about, right? I mean, it's because they've used so much copyrighted material. And this is this huge, burning, raging debate online. And just as we're getting into it, let me just sort of say, I have a writing background. I sort of really sympathize with the writers, the creators, everything else out there. And also, we want these AI models to be great, and this is kind of how they become great. So yes, a federal judge in San Francisco, make of that what you will, did side with Anthropic. However, there is a big caveat, right? So they won this fair use argument for training its AI models, right? But this battle is not really over, right? So in this milestone thing, here's what happened. Essentially, Anthropic's use of copyrighted books to train Claude is protected under this I don't know what you call it, a U.S. doctrine or whatever of fair use, right? So the process, and this is the whole thing, right? The judge is calling this process, and this is in quotes, exceedingly transformative. And it sort of compared it. And Jaden, this is the thing that sort of struck me, right? Because this is the ongoing debate that we had. He was comparing it, this judge, to a human writer learning from a lot of works to create something new. So as you said, I kind of was posting about this on LinkedIn, and a lot of people are going back and forth being like, yeah, but what human can read 7 million books, right? But this is what AI companies have been saying all along. Let's face it, this is what they've been praying for all along. And it can, I think, shape the precedent for a ton of these other lawsuits. The problem is that it's not really over. That's just sort of one side of it, right? Because as you said, they stored 7 million essentially pirated books in a central library. Now I'm trying to think of what to compare that to, but they're going to sort of figure out whether Anthropic has to pay damages for this, which might be, as you sort of, when you're watching the old VHS tapes and it's $250,000 per violation. That's kind of like this, right? It says up to $150,000 per pirated work if they are found liable. So one of the things about these lawsuits is that I don't think anybody really expects, they'll probably have to pay, huge fines and things like that. But I think much more likely to happen is they are going to just have to settle with a ton of authors or sort of something class action-y or something like that. But it also, remember that the really big lawsuits are also going on, right? There's 12 lawsuits that have been combined into a single lawsuit in New York against OpenAI and Microsoft, which is, again, same thing, accusing them of of using copyrighted books without permission to train them. So the authors are on this. They're Ta-Nehisi Coates and Sarah Silverman, and then of course the New York Times, things like that. And so OpenAI is arguing for fair use. By the way, Meta also in this, sort of using books from shadow libraries, I think it's called LibGen or something like this, houses millions of copyrighted, pirated titles. So this is sort of where I'm trying to figure out where we land on this, right? Because one of the things about something like Napster, for anybody kind of old enough to remember when we used to sort of take music from Napster, the problem with Napster wasn't that they were sort of like doing a peer-to-peer file sharing type of thing. The problem was that Napster was hosting songs on a server. And that's where I'm wondering if this sort of case is going to hinge on this sort of thing. So number one, if you can really use this as fair use, that's huge. What is it? My big question also is like, what does this do for, the Disney and Universal case against Midjourney, for example? I think that's different. I think images are going to be different, but really the fair use question has been central to whether these models trained on something legally or not. And that's where I think that sort of in some way, at least one precedent has been set. It doesn't mean that's a precedent forever and ever. But the other part is, did they use pirated books for the 7 million pirated books?
Yeah,
And that's where I think the case is going to get interesting, right?
Yeah. So like my thoughts on it are, of course, with the Midjourney thing and recreating Disney, I think Midjourney is just going to get blocked or banned from recreating like Disney or whatever. And it's going to be annoying. They're going to have to go through and they'll put like negative words that you can't use in prompts. It's kind of like, honestly, Midjourney already has a capability, because even when it first launched, if you asked it to create a image of Xi Jinping, it would say, sorry, I can't do that. So now I just can't do Mickey Mouse either. I think that one's, even if an artist studied all the works of Disney and then drew Mickey Mouse, like they can't publish and sell it because they don't have the trademark. So, I think that one's kind of safe, and that's pretty much where that lawsuit is going to go. As far as where this lawsuit goes, you're right. There's two sides of it. And I actually completely agree with this one, where it's like, can you take works and train with them? I think yes, because and that's me, of course, my opinion, but it's like, yeah, a human could go read, it could learn, and then it can come up with interesting things, combining a lot of data points. That's what these models are doing. And I just think it should be allowed, but that's just my opinion. The thing that they got in trouble for is actually what they originally did, allegedly, was download all of the books in the world from a pirated website. And that's actually what they originally trained their model with. And you also have to remember, like, a lot of this was done when we didn't even know if ChatGPT was going to work. They're like, we need a ton of data. Like, should we spend all the little bit of money? Well, I'm sure they'd raised a lot, but should we spend all the money we have to like buy every book in the world on a business model we don't know if it's going to work? I guess that was their decision at the time. They pirated it. So you can see arguments on both sides of that, probably super illegal. But the judge actually split this lawsuit into two parts and said, we're going to go and litigate that separately. So that's not settled. We're going to talk about the downloading the pirated books to train. Because after they trained it off the pirated books, in order to kind of like, I don't know if it's cover their tracks, but basically they actually went and bought a physical copy of every single book that they had pirated, or I think probably everyone that they could. Then they would send it to a big warehouse, rip the covers off of it, scan every single page into a PDF, upload that, use that for the training data. So that's kind of how they try to cover their tracks. And they're like, look, no, we've literally purchased every book. And to be honest, I actually think it's fair. Now, was it fair the way they did the pirated first, yada, yada? Like, I don't know. They'll all litigate that and see if there's a huge fine or if it's a slap on the wrist or what happens. At the end of the day, though, I think I like the precedent that you can take data, you can read it, you can train from it. Honestly, it'd be a crazy precedent if you couldn't, just because of the way the internet works. But anyways, and yeah, I'm sure people are mad about this on all sides of it, but I think you should be able to do that. And the pirated side, yeah, you shouldn't be downloading pirated stuff to train from. So they did it right the second time. And the thing that I'm excited about is, regardless of what happens to Anthropic in this case, if they get massive billion-dollar fines or not, there is a path to making these models legally and legitimately. And it seems like we're setting that precedent. So future AI companies come down the line, or other AI companies want to do this, like, we know how to do it. Now just go buy all the physical books, rip the covers off. Right. And if that's what you want to do, that's how you got to do it. And so, like, I don't know. In my opinion, I'm happy that there's a path, and I'll be interested to see what happens with, of course, the whole pirated side of it as well, that lawsuit.
Yeah. But this is the thing. This is what's so interesting about this case, is that what it's hinging on is this pirated thing, which is never legal in the first place, right? You can't buy pirated books. But I don't know. I mean, that's definitely not sort of like the soul of the issue. I mean, the soul of the issue is really coming from creators who are saying, not only is AI ripping off, our works, but also it's also putting us out of business because it ripped off our works, right? I mean, so like you think about all the graphic designers, all the writers, everybody else who are now sort of, and forget about journalists, everybody else, right? I mean, this is where it gets, kind of creeping into ethical issues here. And even if it's not legal issues, it's the ethics, which is an interesting aspect of this, right? Because again, the exact thing that these companies are doing to these creators, it's not just stealing their works, it's actually putting them sort of almost like making them obsolete to a certain extent. So when you talk about like what Disney is doing, that feels more, I don't know, to me, clear cut. Like when you can create, or
Yeah.
Universal or whatever, when you can create images of Mickey Mouse or Shrek or something like that, that feels like, okay, well, that's pretty black and white. But yeah, when you're reading things and just like learning from them and then sort of like doing something in the style of, Sarah Silverman or in the style of Ta-Nehisi Coates, who are two of the major authors who are suing Big AI and Anthropic or sorry, OpenAI in particular. That's critical. However, the New York Times, if I recall correctly, like what the New York Times was talking about was that it was literally taking, sort of exactly verbatim paragraphs. So do you remember this? Like one of the things that the New York Times tried to show in court was that it took an exact paragraph word for word from a Wirecutter article, if I recall that correctly. And the funny thing is that even OpenAI was like, how did you manage to do that? Because it's very hard to, unless you're
Yeah.
sort of like taking an exact quote and, scrolling the internet as if you'd sort of like look it up on Google or something like that. But if you're saying like, hey, I'm trying to decide whether I should buy this vacuum cleaner or not, and somehow the New York Times got OpenAI or ChatGPT to spit out the exact paragraph from Wirecutter. I mean, the amount of prompting that must have taken is extraordinary. So usually, again, like the kind of the argument that New York Times is making, it was sort of like even violating the terms of service of ChatGPT in terms of
Yeah.
how it was getting that. I guess all this is to say there's two questions here, right? There's a legal issue and an ethical issue. And I think where we are going to have to land, and I think this is already where we're landing, is a giant partnership between AI
Yeah.
and these, for example, media outlets, authors, things like that. Because otherwise, especially with media outlets like news and things like that, we are facing an existential crisis in the media world, right? I mean, like newspapers and everything else. Authors, probably a little bit of a different story. But I just can't help but think that while this is sort of saying like, okay, fair use is okay, and it's only the pirated issue, I just don't think that. I think that we may be facing some kind of huge backlash. I don't know how much this is making the news outside of our bubble, but it feels like backlash material. You know what I mean?
And I think that we're starting to see, like, we're seeing the AI companies make partnerships, like OpenAI with Axel Springer
Yeah,
and
right.
other like big news organizations. So I think there's room there, especially if they decide to like close their content off from people,
Yeah.
other people like using it and stuff. It's premium content, paywalled, whatever. So yeah, I think that's eventually where it's going to go. I'll be curious to see if there's like some sort of startup that aggregates or puts together like blogs and like here's like a blog data set, these ones all opted in. I know one of my music distributors called Lander, and they have like a, check this box if you want to allow your music to be included into AI training data sets, and they sell that then, and you get like a kickback from the licensing deal that they'll strike up with Suno or Udio or whatever for music. So I think like you'll probably start to see that. It's harder because there's not as many like consolidated distribution services for blogs. It's kind of like everything, right? Whereas like music, there's maybe like 20 main distributors that you can publish your music through independently. So those 20, it's like all the only companies that you got to make a deal with. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But overall, I think that's probably the way it goes in the future. AI companies will probably try to get out of paying for as much as they possibly can. But yeah, I think that there'll be some deals that get struck there. Listen,
Yeah, there have to be. Yeah.
if you guys enjoyed the podcast today, make sure to leave a rating and review. It's the number one thing that Connor and I greatly appreciate. I am new to North Carolina, and it is absolutely sweltering hot outside. And the only thing that can quench the heat that I feel on this side of the world that I just moved to is reading your heart cooling, not even heartwarming. These are heart cooling reviews. So I really do appreciate them. If you could leave them, thank you so much. Helps the podcast a lot. But hope you guys all have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will catch you next time.